Picture Germany in your head. What do you see? Probably something like this: orderly streets, efficient trains, excellent beer, world-class engineering. The country that rebuilt itself from rubble twice in 1 century and still became one of the richest, most stable nations on Earth. A country that, even after everything it did and everything that was done to it, figured out how to build something worth living in. That image is not wrong. Germany is genuinely impressive. And it's collapsing. Not loudly. Not with earthquakes or invasions or economic crashes, at least not yet. It's collapsing quietly. The way a building collapses when you remove the foundation brick by brick over 50 years and then look up one day and realize there is almost nothing left holding it together. The foundation in question is people, specifically young people, and Germany has been running out of them for a very long time. This is not a story about immigration, or about politics, or about which party is to blame. It's a story about mathematics. About what happens when a society makes a set of perfectly rational individual choices that add up collectively to civilizational suicide. About what happens when the people making decisions for a country's future are the same people who will be dead before the consequences arrive. Germany is facing a demographic catastrophe that has been decades in the making and is now, finally, arriving. And the worst part? Everyone knew. The math has been available since the 1970s, the warnings were issued, the projections were published, the governments read the reports, nodded seriously, and pushed the problem forward another 4 years. Until now. Because now, there is nowhere left to push. This is the story of how one of the greatest countries in the world decided to eat its young. And what happens when it runs out. To understand where Germany is going, you have to understand where it came from. And the story starts earlier than most people think. Germany was among the first countries to industrialize on a serious scale. By the 1870s, the German states newly unified under Prussia were already building factories, railways, and steel mills at a pace that shocked the rest of Europe. And industrialization, everywhere it has ever happened, does one very reliable thing. It reduces the number of children people have. This is not a mystery. When families leave farms and move to cities, children stop being an economic asset, extra hands to work the land, and start being an economic cost. Housing is small. Childcare doesn't exist. Wives enter the workforce. The cultural logic of large families evaporates within a generation. Germany went through this transition in the late 19th and early 20th century, earlier than most. By the interwar period, German fertility rates were already declining. The Great Depression accelerated this. Nobody was having children they couldn't afford to feed. World War II killed a generation of young German men outright, further distorting the population structure. Then came the post-war economic miracle, the Wirtschaftswunder. West Germany rebuilt with astonishing speed. The 1950s and 60s were a baby boom, not quite as dramatic as in the US, but real. A bulge of children born to parents who had survived the war, who had jobs, who had hope. Those children are the baby boomers, and they are the central characters of this story. In the late 1960s, West Germany changed dramatically. The pill became widely available. The student protest movements of 1968 swept through German universities, questioning authority, questioning tradition, questioning the idea that a woman's primary purpose was to have children. These were not small cultural shifts. They were tectonic. By the early 1970s, West Germany's fertility rate had fallen below 2.1, the replacement rate, the level at which a population can sustain itself without immigration, and it never came back up. East Germany had its own version of this story. The GDR tried to reverse the trend with aggressive pro-natalist policies. Generous maternity leave, subsidized childcare, housing priority for families with children. And for a while, it worked. East German fertility rates held up slightly better than West Germany's through the 70s and 80s. But after reunification in 1990, East Germany experienced one of the most dramatic fertility collapses ever recorded in peacetime. The rate fell to roughly 0.77 children per woman in 1994. Less than 1 child per woman. In the entire documented history of modern nations, almost nothing matches that number. People were terrified, uncertain. The entire social system they'd grown up in had evaporated overnight. Nobody was having children. The rate recovered somewhat, but the damage was structural, and it was permanent. Today, in 2025, Germany's fertility rate stands at approximately 1.4 children per woman. It has been below replacement for 55 consecutive years. No significant interruption, no recovery, just a long, slow, unbroken decline. Here's where we need to do some math. Don't worry, it's not complicated, but it is disturbing. At one point, 4 children per woman, every 100 Germans produce about 70 children. When those 70 children grow up and have their own kids at the same rate, they produce 49. Those 49 produce 34, and those 34 produce 24. 4 generations. A 76% population decline. Starting from 100 people, you arrive at 24. Now, Germany is not going to shrink by 76% in 80 years because immigration exists and people's choices do change. But the direction of that math is real, and it compounds relentlessly. Every year you stay below replacement, the next generation is smaller, which means the generation after that is smaller still. You cannot stop compound shrinkage by wishing it away. But here's the thing that makes this not just a curiosity, but an actual crisis. At the same time the population has been shrinking, life expectancy has been exploding. In 1960, a German man who made it to retirement at 65 could expect to live, on average, about 14 more years. Today, that number is closer to 20. And for German women, it's over 22. That's an extra 6 to 8 years of retirement that the system is paying for compared to what it was designed to support. So you have a shrinking base of young people and a rapidly expanding population of very old people. The population pyramid, which should look like a wide base tapering to a narrow top, now looks like a balloon sitting on a pin. Germany in 2026 has a median age of over 45. Think about what that means. Half of the country is older than 45. Almost 2 in 5 Germans are over 50. Almost 1 in 4 is over 65. Only 1 in 8 is a child under 14. That is not a normal age distribution. That is an elderly society with a thin layer of working-age people sandwiched underneath it, holding everything up. Here is something that gets lost in most discussions of this topic. People hear demographic decline and imagine a slow, gradual fade. A country that gets smaller and quieter and eventually works itself out. That's not what happens. What happens is a transition period, a specific window of time, maybe 20 to 30 years, when the population composition shifts dramatically and all at once. When a huge cohort of old people needs to be supported by a much smaller cohort of working people who aren't there yet. Germany is entering that transition period right now. The boomers are retiring, and the cliff they're walking off is not metaphorical. Meet Julia. She is 34 years old. She has a university degree in engineering, earns a good salary by most European standards, and lives in a 2-bedroom apartment in Hamburg with her partner. She would like to have children, she has said this. She means it. But the apartment is small and they can't afford a bigger one in the city. Childcare waitlists in her district run to 18 months. Her net salary, after taxes and social contributions, is considerably lower than her gross would suggest. She spends about 40% of what remains on rent. The math, every time she runs it, doesn't work. Julia is not unusual. Julia is statistically typical. Julia's situation is not the result of personal failure. It is the output of a system that was designed for a different Germany, a younger Germany, a growing Germany, and has never been updated to reflect the one that actually exists. Let's look at some numbers that are easy to understand and hard to sit with. Germany currently has a working-age population of roughly 45 million people. By 2035, that number is projected to fall by 7 million. Those aren't people who emigrate or die young, they are the trailing edge of smaller generations entering the workforce behind the retiring boomers. There are simply fewer of them. In 2030 alone, Germany may face a shortfall of up to 3 million skilled workers. Not because companies suddenly need more people, but because the people who currently do those jobs will have retired and there aren't enough younger people with the right skills to replace them. Waiting times for everything from airport baggage to specialist doctors to building permits to social worker appointments will increase, not because of inefficiency, because of arithmetic. Some of these sectors are already in crisis. Germany currently has roughly 120,000 unfilled nursing positions. The average wait time for a specialist doctor appointment in the state health system is already measured in months. Municipalities across eastern Germany are struggling to staff basic administrative services. Rural hospitals are closing, not because they're unprofitable, well, sometimes also that, but because there are no doctors or nurses willing to work in areas with shrinking populations and declining infrastructure. And it gets darker. As the working population shrinks and the retired population expands, the entire system of social provision that Germans rely on, healthcare, long-term care, pension income, social services, faces pressure from both sides simultaneously. Fewer contributors, more beneficiaries. Every year, this is not a looming possibility. This is already happening. The numbers are public, the trends are confirmed. The question is not whether Germany will face these pressures. The question is how bad it will get before anyone is willing to do something about it. To understand why the demographic crisis threatens Germany's welfare state specifically, you need to understand how Germany's pension system works. And the key word is, it doesn't. Not anymore. Not really. Germany runs what's called a pay-as-you-go system, or in German, the Umlageverfahren. This means that the pension contributions deducted from your paycheck today are not saved for your future retirement. They are paid out immediately to current retirees. When you retire, your pension will be paid by whoever is working at that point. The logic of this system depends entirely on one thing: the ratio of workers to retirees. When there are many workers and few retirees, the system is easy to fund. When that ratio inverts, when there are few workers and many retirees, the math collapses. In 1960, there were roughly 5 working Germans for every 1 retiree. 5 people contributing to support one person's pension. That's a comfortable ratio. The system worked. By 2024, that ratio has fallen to approximately 2.5 workers per retiree. Still functional, but visibly strained. By the mid-2030s, as the full boomer retirement wave hits, projections put that ratio at closer to 1.8 workers per retiree. Some models suggest it could approach 1.5 inches, the 2040s. Think about what 1.5 means. 1.5 workers trying to fund one retiree's pension while also funding healthcare, housing, their own lives, and the future of any children they might have. The math doesn't just not work, it catastrophically doesn't work. Here is a number that should make every German taxpayer, young or old, extremely uncomfortable. In 2025, the German federal government spent approximately 25% of its entire annual budget subsidizing the pension system. Not on pensions directly, that money comes from payroll contributions. This is the additional gap money that the contributions alone cannot cover. A quarter of all federal tax revenue used to fill the hole between what workers pay in and what pensioners are owed. To put that in context, Germany spent more on pension subsidies in 2025 than on education, scientific research, infrastructure, maintenance, and defense combined. And this is the part that is almost never said out loud in German political discourse. This has been true in some form since the 1970s. German governments have known for 50 years that the pension math was broken. They knew because they were already subsidizing it. Every government since Helmut Schmidt's chancellorship has looked at the actuarial projections, looked at the political cost of addressing them honestly, and chosen to subsidize the present at the expense of the future. They built a machine that could only work if the population kept growing. The population stopped growing, and rather than retool the machine, they just kept pouring money into it and hoping. Well, the future arrived. The total social contribution burden on a German employee pension, health insurance, long-term care insurance, unemployment insurance currently runs to about 40% of gross income for the average earner. For higher earners, between income tax and social contributions, the effective rate approaches 50%. This is not abstract. This means that a German engineer earning €60,000 gross takes home roughly €35,000 to €37,000 net. Almost half of every euro they earn is immediately redirected, primarily to support a pension system they will almost certainly not receive at the same level. Because here's the other shoe: the current pension system's generosity is not sustainable. Pension reform proposals have been cycling through German political debate for 2 decades. Most serious analysts agree that either contribution rates rise significantly, retirement ages rise significantly, benefit levels fall significantly, or some combination of all three. There is no fourth option. The math does not offer a fourth option. Current retirees are receiving the benefits of a system that was funded by a larger, younger Germany that no longer exists. Current young workers are funding that generosity while facing the near certainty that their own retirement will be considerably less comfortable. They are paying a premium for a product they will receive at a discount. That's not an opinion, that's the arithmetic of a shrinking population. At this point, you might be wondering, why didn't anyone fix this? The math has been available for decades. The projections were published. Everyone who wanted to look could see what was coming. So why didn't they look? The answer is democracy. Specifically, the version of democracy that emerges when one generation becomes dominant enough to determine every electoral outcome. In 1980, German baby boomers were in their 20s and 30s. They were young, they had few votes and lots of energy. They were the ones who should have been raising alarm about a pension system that depended on population growth that clearly wasn't happening. By 2000, the boomers were in their 40s and 50s. They were becoming the dominant electoral bloc. They had mortgages and careers and pension expectations. Reforming the system would have cost them directly. So reforms were watered down, delayed, or abandoned. By 2020, boomers and their slightly older precursors, the silent generation, represented the single largest and most reliable voting bloc in Germany. Politicians had figured out by this point that proposals to cut pension benefits or raise retirement ages were political suicide. The grey vote was decisive in every election, and the grey vote voted, above all else, to protect its pensions. Germany did attempt one significant pension reform in 2001, the Riester reform, named after Labour Minister Walter Riester. The idea was to partially shift Germany toward a mixed system, a smaller state pension supplemented by subsidized private retirement savings. The Riester pension became one of the great policy disasters of modern German history. The accounts were complex to set up, riddled with fees that eroded returns, opaque in their terms, and so poorly designed for low-income earners that the people who needed retirement savings most were least likely to benefit. By the 2020s, millions of Riester accounts held by German workers were projecting final values that would provide essentially meaningless retirement income. The administrative costs alone consumed a significant portion of many accounts' returns. Rather than course-correct aggressively, the government tinkered. Rather than acknowledge the failure, they subsidized new variations. The fundamental problem that Germany needed either population growth, higher contributions, lower benefits, or all three remained unaddressed. Germany's standard retirement age was set at 65 inches the post-war era. In 2007, a reform gradually raised it to 67 to be phased in by 2029. This was immediately opposed by unions and the SPD as an attack on workers. It was watered down with extensive early retirement provisions. Then, in one of the most spectacular acts of demographic denial in modern European history, Germany introduced the Rente mit 63 in 2014, the right to retire at 63 with full benefits after 45 years of contributions. This policy was introduced and championed by the Grand Coalition, the SPD and CDU governing together as a concession to older workers who had started working early. The timing is worth sitting with. Germany introduced a generous early retirement option in 2014. The boomer retirement wave was already clearly visible in every demographic model. The pension math was already strained. And the political response was to make it easier and cheaper to retire early. The policy cost the pension system billions annually. It accelerated exactly the demographic pressure that was already building. And it was enormously popular with the voters who mattered most. This is what mismanagement looks like at the systemic level. Not corruption, not malice. Just a democracy responding rationally to the incentives created by an aging electorate at the expense of the people who hadn't been born yet, or who were too young to vote, or who would cast their ballot and watch it disappear into the grey majority anyway. Leon is 28. He finished his apprenticeship as an electrician at 22 and has been working steadily since then. He earns €3,100 gross per month, decent money for his age, he knows. After deductions, he takes home €1,940. His rent in Cologne is €950 for a one-bedroom apartment, and he considers himself lucky because friends who moved to Munich are paying €1,300 for the same thing. After rent, utilities, food, transport, and phone, Leon has roughly €400 left each month, some months less. He has been told he should be saving for retirement. He has been told he should be investing. He nods when people say this. He has nothing to invest. Leon is not failing. Leon is the output of a system that extracts the maximum from young workers and returns the minimum. The numbers work like this. Germany has one of the highest total tax and social contribution burdens in the developed world. The average German worker loses approximately 40% of gross income to income tax and social insurance contributions before they ever touch their salary. But that number understates the real picture, because social contributions are split between employer and employee, which means the true cost of employing a German worker is significantly higher than the gross salary, making employers hesitant to raise wages faster than they otherwise might. Meanwhile, the consumer price index in Germany's major cities has risen sharply over the past decade. Food costs are up, energy costs skyrocketed after 2022 and have not fully normalized. Transport costs have risen, and most significantly, housing. The result is a generation that earns more in nominal terms than any previous German generation, but retains less. Their purchasing power, after contributions and after cost of living, is in many cases lower than their parents' was at the same age in the same cities. The standard advice given to young Germans worried about their retirement is: save privately, invest in ETFs, build wealth through the market. This advice is not wrong in principle. It is just wildly disconnected from arithmetic reality for a large portion of the population. For Leon, for Julia, for the millions of young Germans in the €25,000, €45,000 annual income range, which is most of them the disposable income available for investment after taxes, contributions, and cost of living is minimal. Financial advisors often recommend saving 10–15% of gross income for retirement. At €37,200 gross, that's €3,720 to €5,580 per year, or €310 to €465 per month. For Leon, that is essentially his entire disposable income. Every month. With nothing left for emergencies, holidays, or the events that constitute actually living a life. And this is before we account for the housing question. Owning a home is, across most wealthy countries, the single most reliable mechanism by which working and middle-class people accumulate wealth. It is a forced savings account with leverage. It is also, increasingly, unavailable to ordinary young Germans. Germany has some of the most expensive urban real estate in Europe. This would be surprising if you didn't know the history. For most of the post-war period, Germany was a country of renters. Homeownership rates were low by European standards, hovering around 40% compared to 60–70% in France or the UK. This was partly cultural, partly regulatory, and partly because Germany's strong renter protections made renting genuinely comfortable and secure. Then, three things happened simultaneously. First, interest rates fell to historic lows in the 2010s, making mortgages cheap and driving investment into real estate as an asset class. Institutional investors, private landlords, and real estate funds poured money into German housing. Prices rose. Second, Germany received very large waves of migrants and refugees in the mid-2010s, most visibly around 2015–2016, but continuing at significant levels throughout the decade. This added genuine demand pressure on urban housing markets, particularly in cities where migrants disproportionately settled. Third, and most structurally, Germany failed to build enough housing. This is not a migration story or an investment story. It is a construction story. German municipalities, constrained by NIMBYism, environmental regulations, heritage protections, bureaucratic permitting processes that can stretch for years, and the accumulated political influence of existing homeowners who want their property values to rise, simply did not build. The result? In Munich, the average price per square meter for residential property now exceeds €9,000. A modest 80 square meter apartment, enough for a couple, possibly a small child, costs over €700,000. With a 20% down payment requirement and typical German mortgage terms, a couple would need to have saved €140,000 before they even begin, and would then take on a mortgage whose monthly payment consumes most of their combined disposable income for 30 years. This is not a lifestyle choice, this is structural exclusion from wealth accumulation. Here is why housing matters for demography specifically. Study after study across multiple countries shows that housing security is among the strongest predictors of whether young couples decide to have children. Not the only factor, cultural attitudes, career expectations, and access to childcare all matter. But housing is foundational. You do not start a family in an apartment you can be priced out of. You do not have a second or third child when you cannot expand your living space. Germany's home ownership rate remains around 42%, one of the lowest in the EU. The gap between owners and renters has not just financial implications, but psychological ones. Renters have less long-term stability, they move more. They feel, correctly, that their living situation is contingent on decisions made by others, and they have children at lower rates. The home ownership gap also tracks closely with the wealth gap. German homeowners, predominantly older, have seen their assets appreciate dramatically. German renters, predominantly younger, have seen their costs rise, while their ability to save erodes. Every year that passes without serious housing policy reform widens this gap. And every year that gap widens, a few more young Germans run the numbers and decide that a family isn't something the math supports right now, maybe in a few years. Maybe when things improve, things don't improve on their own. Not in a system designed the way Germany's is. By now, you might be thinking, why don't young Germans just vote for politicians who will fix this? Why don't they vote for pension reform, housing, investment, lower contributions, family incentives, all the things that would actually help them? The answer is that they do. And it doesn't matter. In Germany's 2021 federal election, voters under 30 split heavily toward the Greens and FDP. Voters over 60 who turned out in higher numbers split heavily toward the CDU, CSU and SPD. The parties favored by young voters lost influence. The parties favored by old voters gained it. And the policies that emerged from the resulting coalition reflected, as they always do, the preferences of the people who actually determined the outcome. This is not a conspiracy. It's arithmetic applied to democracy. In 2025, Germans over 60 make up roughly 30% of the population, but over 40% of actual voters because they turn out more reliably. Germans under 30 make up about 15% of the population and roughly 10% of voters. The voting bloc that is most harmed by Germany's demographic policies has the least power to change them. The voting bloc that has most benefited from those policies has the most power to protect them. And here is the feedback loop that makes this particularly insidious. When young Germans cannot afford housing, they delay families. When they delay families, there are fewer young Germans in the next cohort. When there are fewer young Germans, the grey vote becomes proportionally larger. When the grey vote is larger, politicians have even less incentive to reform pension and housing policy. Which means young Germans still can't afford housing. Which means they delay families. Which means you see where this goes. Demographic decline in a democracy is not just a population crisis, it is a political crisis. The society losing its young people loses, at the same time, the political constituency most motivated to invest in the future. And the society gains, proportionally, the constituency most motivated to preserve the present at the future's expense. Germany has not found a way out of this loop. No wealthy democracy has. It is the defining political challenge of aging societies, and it is almost never named clearly, because naming it clearly would require politicians to tell their most reliable voters that their comfort is the country's problem. The pension crisis is the most discussed element of Germany's demographic problem. The healthcare crisis may be worse. Here's a medical fact that has enormous financial and social implications. Healthcare costs are not evenly distributed across a lifetime. In fact, they are dramatically concentrated in the final years. Roughly 60% of all lifetime healthcare costs are incurred in the last quarter of life. The final 2 years before death are, for most people, the most medically expensive of their lives. Now hold that fact alongside this one. Germany is about to enter a period in which the number of people in their final years of life will increase dramatically and, simultaneously, because an entire generation, the boomers, is aging together. By 2035, there will be several million more Germans over 80 than there are today. The demand for hospital beds, specialist consultations, surgical procedures, long-term medications, nursing home placements, home care visits, palliative care, and end-of-life services will increase at a rate that the system is nowhere near equipped to handle. At the same time this demand explosion is occurring, the healthcare workforce is shrinking for exactly the same demographic reasons. Germany currently faces a shortage of approximately 50,000 doctors and 200,000 nurses. These numbers are already causing visible system strain. Long waits for specialist appointments, rural areas with no GPs, nursing homes operating at unsafe staffing ratios. And this is before the boomer retirement wave removes a significant chunk of the existing healthcare workforce because doctors and nurses are also aging. The average age of a German general practitioner is currently over 55. Nearly a third of all German GPs are expected to retire within the next decade. Who replaces them? Germany trains doctors, but not fast enough. Medical school places are heavily regulated, take a decade to fully produce practicing specialists, and the pipeline cannot simply be expanded overnight. Germany recruits doctors from Eastern Europe and elsewhere, but so does every other wealthy European country, and the global supply of trained medical professionals is finite. Healthcare costs already consume a large and growing share of German GDP. The combination of more patients needing more expensive care and fewer workers available to deliver it will force a reckoning. Either costs rise dramatically, squeezing workers already paying 40% in contributions, or waiting times extend further, or services are rationed, or some combination of all three. A healthcare system that worked adequately for an average-aged country will not work for one of the oldest countries in the world. Germany is finding this out in real time. There is a dimension of Germany's demographic crisis that doesn't get enough attention, perhaps because it's harder to quantify than birth rates and pension ratios. It is the emigration of the young and talented. Germany has, for most of its history, been a country people move to, not from. The economic miracle, the stability, the infrastructure, the social safety net, these were powerful attractants. And Germany still receives significant immigration, which we'll address shortly. But something has shifted in the other direction as well. Emigration from Germany has been rising. In 2023, roughly 281,000 Germans left the country, one of the higher figures in recent decades. Surveys of younger, highly educated Germans consistently show elevated intentions to leave. The reasons they cite are familiar: housing costs, tax burden, bureaucratic frustration, limited career flexibility, and a diffuse sense that Germany does not prioritize the young. This matters because emigration is not random. It selects disproportionately for mobility, ambition, and qualifications. The people most likely to leave Germany are young, educated, and economically productive, precisely the people most needed to support an aging population. A software developer in Berlin can work remotely from Lisbon or Amsterdam or Tallinn, pay lower taxes, enjoy a lower cost of living, and often a better climate. And increasing numbers of them are doing exactly that. The people least likely to leave are those with roots, families, property, social networks, regional attachments, which means emigration systematically depletes the mobile, skilled young workforce, while the less mobile population, skewing older, stays. Germany is not facing a catastrophic brain drain by global standards, but even a modest, sustained outflow of its most economically productive young people materially worsens the dependency ratio, reduces tax receipts, and undermines the very tax base needed to fund the expanding elderly population. It is a slow leak in an already strained vessel. Germany's demographic crisis is real everywhere, but it is not evenly distributed. And understanding the East-West divide is essential to understanding how the crisis will actually play out, because in some parts of Germany, the future is not approaching, it has already arrived. The 5 eastern states, Saxony, Saxony-Anhalt, Thuringia, Brandenburg, and Mecklenburg-Vorpommern experienced something almost without precedent after reunification in 1990. Their economies collapsed. Their industries evaporated. Their young people left. In the 3 decades since reunification, the eastern states have lost roughly 15% of their population, millions of people disproportionately young and female. Some eastern German towns have shrunk by a third. Schools have closed. Hospitals have consolidated or shut entirely. Villages that were functioning communities in 1989 now have more pensioners than working-age residents. The infrastructure built for a larger population sits oversized and crumbling, too expensive to maintain for the people who remain. This is what advanced demographic decline looks like. Not a tidy shrinkage where everything scales proportionally, but a patchwork of abandonment, where services disappear faster than populations decline because services require minimum viable scales to function at all. When a rural area loses its last GP, the remaining residents don't get worse healthcare, they get none. The irony is that Eastern Germany's fertility rate is now broadly similar to Western Germany's. The demographic problem was never just fertility. It was the combination of low fertility and the internal migration that followed economic collapse. Young people voted with their feet, and what they voted for was anywhere else. The lesson for the rest of Germany, and for any country watching this unfold, is that demographic decline is not just about national totals, it is about geographic concentration. Some regions hit critical thresholds long before others, and when they do, the political, social, and economic consequences arrive suddenly and all at once, not gradually and manageably. Before we go any further, we need to talk about immigration. Because whenever you describe Germany's demographic challenges, someone, often many people, will immediately say, just increase immigration, problem solved. This is not a political conversation. We are not making an argument for or against immigration as a policy. We are asking a simpler question. Can immigration mathematically solve Germany's demographic crisis? And the honest answer is partially, temporarily, and with significant conditions attached. Let's look at what immigration actually does. Germany has received very large numbers of migrants and refugees over the past decade. Net migration has averaged several 100,000 people per year across the 2010s and into the 2020s, with peaks around 2015, 2016 during the refugee crisis, and again after the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. This immigration has, unambiguously, slowed the rate at which Germany's working-age population has declined. Many of those immigrants work, contribute to the tax base, and support the pension system. Without them, Germany's dependency ratio would already be significantly worse. So, immigration helps. That's real. But here are its limits, and they are serious. The fertility rates of most immigrant groups to Germany adjust toward the German average within 1 to 2 generations. This is a consistent finding across European immigration research. First-generation immigrants may have slightly higher fertility, but their children's fertility rates converge with those of the host population. Immigration does not solve the structural fertility problem. It delays its effects. To offset Germany's projected workforce decline through immigration alone, you would need sustained net migration of several 100,000 skilled, working-age people per year every year indefinitely. Even setting aside the political challenges, this requires a global supply of young, willing migrants that is itself shrinking. Fertility rates are falling across the developing world. South Korea, Taiwan, and China are already below Germany's rate. Much of Latin America is approaching it. Africa and South Asia still have higher rates, but those rates are declining rapidly. The world is, on a decades-long horizon, running out of young people. The competition for mobile, skilled, young migrants among wealthy, aging nations is intensifying every year. Mass immigration works demographically only if it works economically. Immigrants who cannot access the labor market due to credential recognition delays, language barriers, discrimination, or housing scarcity are not solving the dependency ratio problem. Germany's integration record is genuinely mixed. Credential recognition processes are slow, language support is underfunded. Labor market integration rates for refugees have been better than initially feared in some studies, but far from complete. None of this is an argument against immigration. It is an argument against using immigration as a get-out-of-jail card that allows Germany to avoid the harder domestic questions. Immigration can and does ease the consequences of demographic decline. It cannot reverse it. The choice between those two claims matters enormously for policy. We've spent most of this video on Germany because Germany is the clearest, most advanced case in the Western world of what demographic transition looks like when it arrives. But it would be a mistake to treat this as a German peculiarity. Every wealthy country is aging. Every wealthy country has a fertility rate below or approaching replacement. Every wealthy country faces, to varying degrees, the same structural pressure: pay-as-you-go social systems built for growing populations that are no longer growing. Italy's fertility rate is 1.24 lower than Germany's and falling. Spain's is 1.19. South Korea's is 0.72, the lowest ever recorded for a significant country, an almost unimaginable figure. Japan has been grappling with demographic stagnation for 30 years and has not solved it. China's fertility rate collapsed faster than anyone predicted after the end of the one-child policy, because the one-child policy was not why people stopped having children. The cost of living was. The urban pressures were. The career trade-offs were. Remove the coercion, and the outcome barely changes. Canada is aging more slowly than Germany, cushioned by higher immigration levels. But the trajectory is the same. The United States, with higher fertility and more robust immigration, is better positioned, but Social Security faces structural funding challenges that will require serious reform within the next decade. France has maintained relatively higher fertility through aggressive family support policies, but its pension system faces its own existential pressures. The countries that have managed the transition best share some common features. They started planning earlier, they invested heavily in making family formation economically viable, and they built flexible labor markets that allowed women to work and have children simultaneously rather than forcing a choice between the two. None of them solved the problem entirely. Several have done significantly better than Germany. The reason Germany's story matters globally is not just that Germany is big and rich and influential, it's that Germany is a preview. What Germany is experiencing now, most of the developed world will experience within the next 20 to 30 years. The questions Germany is failing to answer are the questions every aging democracy will be forced to answer. Watching Germany not answer them, watching the political system cycle through denial, delay, and blame should be alarming to everyone. Let's talk about solutions, not vague aspirations, actual policy interventions with track records. The countries that have done best at maintaining higher fertility share a common set of features. They made it economically viable to have children. Not just emotionally desirable, not just culturally celebrated, they removed the financial punishment that modern economies impose on family formation. What does that look like in practice? It looks like universal, heavily subsidized, high-quality childcare starting from very early in a child's life, so that having a child does not require one parent to leave the workforce for years. It looks like parental leave policies that are genuinely shared between parents, so that employers cannot systematically disadvantage women who might have children. It looks like housing policy that ensures families can afford space to grow either through direct construction, rent regulation, or robust social housing. It looks like tax systems that do not disproportionately burden young workers with the costs of supporting the elderly. France has maintained one of Europe's higher fertility rates, hovering around 1.8 through exactly this combination: substantial child benefits, near universal early childcare, significant housing support, and a cultural norm that accepts working parents as the standard rather than the exception. France still has a pension crisis, but it has a less severe one because it has more young people. The Nordic countries, Sweden, Finland, Norway, Denmark, have similarly maintained fertility above 1.5 through aggressive family support, shared parental leave, and flexible labour markets. Not perfectly, Nordic fertility has also declined in recent years, but significantly better than Germany's performance over the same period. Hungary has tried a different approach: explicit financial incentives tied to having children, large loans forgiven upon birth of a third child, tax exemptions for mothers of 4 or more children. The results have been modest. Hungary's fertility rate moved from 1.23 to about 1.6, then plateaued. It suggests that raw financial incentives, without addressing the structural costs of family formation, housing, childcare, career continuity, have limited impact. Germany would need to do several things simultaneously and at scale to make meaningful progress. Massively expand childcare. Invest heavily in social and affordable housing, not just urban regeneration, but genuine construction at the scale the shortage demands. Reform the tax burden on workers in the bottom half of the income distribution. Raise the retirement age to 70, phased gradually, which will be politically devastating. Introduce means testing for pension benefits to redirect subsidies from wealthy retirees to working families. None of these things are impossible. All of them would require a political coalition willing to tell the most powerful voting bloc in the country that the status quo is over. In Germany in 2025, that coalition does not exist. Every major party depends on the grey vote to govern. Every major party has watched what happens to politicians who speak honestly about pension reform. And so they don't. So, how over is Germany? Here is the honest answer: not over. But genuinely, structurally, and probably irreversibly changed. The Germany that emerges from the next 30 years will be smaller, older, and under significantly greater fiscal pressure than the Germany of today. Some of its achievements, the generous pension, the comprehensive healthcare, the stable social contract, may not survive intact. The question is whether what replaces them is something Germany chooses thoughtfully or something that arrives as a collapse. The next decade is essentially locked in. The boomers will retire, the pension subsidies will grow, the healthcare system will strain, the dependency ratio will worsen. These things will happen. The demographic momentum built up over 55 years of below replacement fertility cannot be reversed in 5 or 10. Children who haven't been born cannot enter the workforce by 2032. But the decade after that, the 2035 to 2045 window, is not determined yet. The choices Germany makes in the next few years about childcare investment, housing, construction, retirement age, and pension reform will shape what that period looks like. The difference between a managed transition and a genuinely destabilizing crisis is not inevitability, it is political will applied sufficiently early. Germany has had the information it needed to make those choices for 50 years. It has not made them because the political incentives rewarded delay and the costs were always somebody else's future. That somebody else is now alive, working, paying taxes, trying to afford rent, running the arithmetic on whether they can start a family, and mostly concluding, not yet. Not like this. They are right. Not yet. Not like this. Julia, our engineer from Hamburg, turns 35 this year. She and her partner have started seriously discussing leaving Germany, not to abandon it, she says, but because the math keeps not working. She has a colleague in the Netherlands who pays lower effective taxes, has access to childcare that costs a fraction of what it does in Hamburg, and owns a small house outside Rotterdam. Julia is not sure she will leave, but she is, for the first time, sure that she is thinking about it. And she knows she is not the only one running that calculation. Here is what we believe, and it is worth being clear that this is an opinion, not a projection. Germany's demographic crisis is not primarily a fertility problem, it is a priorities problem. Germany has, for 50 years, organized its fiscal, political, and social priorities around protecting the living standards of its oldest citizens at the expense of the conditions that would make it worthwhile for younger citizens to build lives and families there. That is not a moral failing of individual boomers. They made rational choices in a system that rewarded them. It is a structural failure of democratic institutions that are inherently biased toward the present over the future, toward voters over non-voters, toward the old over the not yet born. Fixing it requires acknowledging it, and Germany's political system has spent 50 years demonstrating that it would rather subsidize denial than pay the cost of honesty. The transition period is here. The math is now. And the next generation of Germans, smaller in number, heavier in burden, more economically precarious than their parents, will live in the country that all those years of deliberate inaction built for them. They didn't choose it, but it is theirs. Germany is over. Do you agree?